So this section of the lesson is going to look at the structure of the heart in a bit more detail. If you want any more detail, obviously go back into the lessons that were delivered on the cardiovascular system and the structure of the heart, and you'll get a bit more detail there. But for now, we're just going to spend a very short period of time now just recapping on the structure of the heart, try and get our head around it, because it can be a little bit tricky sometimes when you start looking at the different valves and the chambers and the ventricles and things like that. So we're going to do our best to go back over that, refresh our memory, so we can then apply it to the questions that are coming up, those multiple choice questions that are coming up. Okay, first thing that I want to say is that again, this is the heart, and we're talking about a particular type of muscle here called the cardiac muscle. That's the muscle that surrounds the heart. You have to remember that the heart isn't just a solid muscle. There are some open areas inside of the heart in the upper and lower sections of the heart, which we'll look at now in a little bit more detail. But our heart obviously sits in our chest, in our thoracic cavity in our chest, and it's very, very important. It plays a vital role in us not only staying alive, but also of course taking part in physical activity and making sure that we can keep going, doing our exercises without fatigue. So it plays a key role in the delivery of the oxygen around the body, in the oxygenated blood that we need to get to our muscles and our cells. So what else can we say about the heart at this stage? That's pretty much it. Again, just remember that this is cardiac muscle. Cardiac muscle. So obviously we got some key terms that we need to know here. Within the heart, it's broken down into different chambers. So if we think about them like different chambers, like upstairs and downstairs of the heart, and the different sides of the heart. In fact, that's what I wanted to say on the last slide, was that as we look at a picture or a diagram of a heart, you'll notice that the left and right side are switched around. So you have to imagine when you're talking about the heart and you're looking at it, that you have to imagine that you're looking down on your heart. So what you would see is the left side as you look down at your heart. That side that's closer to your left shoulder is labelled in the correct way. But we have atria. So just looking at the first key term here, we have atria, which is the plural of atrium. Now you'll know that there's the right atrium and the left atrium, and these are the upper chambers of the heart. This is where blood enters the heart. Then moving down, when we look at the lower chambers of the heart, we call them ventricles. So try and get your head around that word, ventricles. These are the lower chambers of the heart, and this is where the blood exits from. So if you imagine, this is where the blood is squeezed out of the ventricles when the heart beats. Now this is really, really key, that we have to understand the difference between oxygenated blood and deoxygenated blood. Now, the biggest misconception here is that deoxygenated blood does not have any oxygen in it. It does, of course, but it just has very low levels, low concentration of oxygen in deoxygenated blood. So when we say oxygenated blood, we're talking about blood that has a high amount or a high concentration of oxygen, and deoxygenated blood has a low concentration of oxygen. So let's have a little look at the structure of the heart in this. So you imagine that there's a slice of the heart, and we can look inside and see what's going on. So really what we want to know here is these atria that I mentioned, these chambers that I mentioned, what are we talking about here? So if we just look at the right atrium, we can see straight away that we're talking about this part here. And remember what I said, that we spin it around. We imagine that we're looking down on this. So this is the right atrium. I'm not going to do that again because it's all obviously already labelled, so there's no point in me wasting time. So right atrium there. Below the right atrium, in this area down here, so we're looking at this area down here now, and this is called the right ventricle. So you can see the blood, first stage, comes in here into the right atrium, straight down into the right ventricle. And if we look at the other side, we can see this section here, which I'm just colouring in yellow, is the left atrium. Again, it's called an atrium because it's in the upper chamber of the heart, and the blood then moves down into the left ventricle, which is just down here. So that's the 4 chambers of the heart. What I want you to look at now is that the heart is pretty much split in two. There's this section here that is really dividing the heart in two. Now that is called the septum. You can see it over here. This is called the septum, and that is just a dividing line that splits the heart into the left side and the right side. Now, very, very important that you look at and compare the two different sides of the heart. And as you can see, the left side of the heart has a lot more of this section here compared to the other side, compared to over here, which is quite narrow. This is cardiac muscle. So this is the muscle that is surrounding the different chambers of the heart. Why is it so thick then on the left hand side? Well, the left hand side, the left ventricle in particular, is the side that needs to be squeezed out to push that blood under high pressure out through the aorta to the rest of the body. So that is why we get so much muscle around this side of the heart here. The left ventricle is the chamber then that gets squeezed out through this blood vessel here and then out to the rest of the body. So it's very, very important that we get our heads around that. Right, so at this particular point, I want you to pay attention to these two valves. So we have this valve here, I'm just circling it in white, and this is the tricuspid valve. It's between the right atrium and the right ventricle. Any valve that you have in your body, its sole purpose is to stop backflow of blood. So you want the blood flowing in one direction and you don't want it flowing back from the right ventricle back up into the right atrium. So that's why this valve here is so important, this tricuspid valve. And then on the other side, very similar, you have another valve between the left atrium and the left ventricle. And that is again trying to keep blood just moving in this direction and not flowing back up from the left ventricle back up into the right atrium. We want to keep that blood flow going in the same direction, in the same loop. So that's important. This causes confusion though. Tricuspid valve, bicuspid valve, semilunar valves. It can cause confusion. But if you just remember T and B, Top Boy is something that I tell the students when I teach this. Try and remember the film, the series that's on Netflix. Top Boy, T, B. Tricuspid on the left, bicuspid on the right as you look at this diagram. That's a good way of remembering it. And obviously you've got these semilunar valves, which are located here and here. Again, is to stop the blood from flowing back down into the left ventricle, and this side to stop it from flowing back down into the right ventricle. So that's pretty much it for the structure of the heart. It might be worthwhile me just showing you that. Let's imagine the journey of the blood, and we'll look at this in a bit of a simpler diagram on the next slide. Let's say the blood comes back in here into the right atrium. Now, why is the color of the blood on this side blue? Because it's deoxygenated blood. It has a very low concentration of oxygen. So it comes back into the right atrium in here, then it gets transferred down here through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle, and then gets pumped up through here and it goes up to the lungs. So this is where it goes up to the lungs. Now obviously in the lungs, this is, I should tell you that this one here is the pulmonary artery. It's a bit of a special artery because it's the only artery that doesn't have oxygenated blood in it. It's going away from the heart, so we know it's an artery, we know that from the last section, but it's going up to the lungs where it's got to pick up that oxygen through the process of respiration and bring it back down into the heart. So let's imagine that the blood has gone up here, it's gone up to the lungs, really bad writing, but it's gone up to the lungs, it's picked up, the oxygen gases exchange has taken place, and then Now it needs to come back down and return back to the heart. So it comes back in to the heart right here through the left atrium, into the left atrium I should say, passes down through the bicuspid valve into the left ventricle. Now all this is where all these muscles down around the side are going to kick in, and it's going to, under very, very high pressure, squeeze this blood up past the semilunar valve, out through the aorta, which is here, and then that's where it goes out to the rest of the body and the muscles and all those cells and organs that need that oxygenated blood. And that pretty much is the loop that it goes on. Looks very, very messy now, but listen, you can wind it back and have a little look at that again. Really try to get your head around it. Yeah, so that really is the structure of the heart. Let's go and look at this very same process, but possibly in a more understandable diagram. So we've got here the cardiovascular system is the system we're looking at. We've got a little picture of the lungs up there, and obviously we got the heart that sits just underneath the lungs. So let's have a little look at here. Now, when you have to talk through the journey of the blood, you can pretty much start anywhere as long as you keep going and come all the way back around to where you began, so you can tell the story of the blood and what's happening. But if we just focus here on this side, so the blood from the lungs to the heart. Now I left a little space there because I want you to tell me, just have a little think now, is this oxygenated or deoxygenated blood? Say it out loud. Hopefully you have said that this is oxygenated blood. Now if we wanted to double check that, we just look, well, this blood is coming away from the lungs and it's going back to the heart. It's going back into the left atrium here. So you can see this journey. Let me just highlight that. You can see this journey, this blood is going back in to the left atrium here. You also see that it's colored in red, and if you ever see that depicted on a diagram like this, red usually signifies oxygenated blood. So blood with a high concentration of oxygen. Okay, great, we've got that. It's coming from the lungs back into the left atrium. Then we know it's going to move down into the left ventricle, which is down here. All these strong muscles are going to kick in, and it's going to pump it out through the aorta to the rest of the body. So that is the journey that's going on here. So it goes to the rest of the body cells. Let's just imagine it's taking it down to the muscles of the lower body. Let's say quadriceps, you're doing some squats. So this blood is being delivered. But notice what happens in here. As the blood passes through the quadricep, it then changes from being oxygenated into that blue color, which signifies deoxygenated. I should actually have shown you that that is oxygenated as well, but I'm going to take it that you completely understand that. This is where the blood passes through the capillaries. Now the capillaries, as we know, are 1 cell thick. That is where the oxygen is diffused from those blood vessels into that quadricep muscle in this instance. So the oxygen is going into the muscle, so energy can occur, those contractions in the muscle can occur. Obviously that removes the oxygen from the blood into that muscle, but we also get a diffusion of CO2, carbon dioxide, into the blood there, because we want to, that gaseous exchange puts that in the blood so we can get rid of that carbon dioxide. So then this deoxygenated blood now flows out and around, continuing on its journey. So it's deoxygenated blood returns to the heart. Let's follow this path up here. Okay, this is starting to make sense now. Drops into the right atrium, the upper chamber, down through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. Right, where's it going to go from here? Well, this is deoxygenated blood. It needs to leave the heart. I can see that it's moving away from the heart, and obviously that is an artery. Oh yeah, it's going up to the lungs, so we know it's pulmonary artery. The word pulmonary signifies it has to do with the lungs. So out it comes, and up here, deoxygenated blood pumped from the heart to the lungs. And that pretty much closes that loop of the cardiovascular system. I hope I explained that well. If not, don't worry about it. Go back, watch it again before you attempt the questions that are following this.